Artemis Fowl, Chapter 4, Part 2. 4 months of stakeout. Even Butler, the consummate professional, was beginning to dread the long nights of dampness and insect bites. Thankfully, the moon was not full every night. It was always the same. They would crouch in their foil-lined blind in complete silence, Butler repeatedly checking his equipment, while Artemis stared unblinking through the eye of the scope. At times like these, nature seemed deafening in their confined space. Butler longed to whistle, to make conversation, anything to break the unnatural silence. But Artemis's concentration was absolute. He would brook no interference or lapse of focus. This was business. Tonight they were in the southeast, the most inaccessible site yet. Butler had been forced to make 3 trips to the Jeep in order to hump the equipment across a stile, a bog, and 2 fields. His boots and trousers were ruined, and now he would have to sit in the blind with ditch water soaking into the seat of his pants. Artemis had somehow contrived to remain spotless. The blind was ingenious in design, and interest had already been expressed in the manufacturing rights, mostly by military representatives, but Artemis had resolved to sell the patent to a sporting goods multinational. It was constructed of an elasticated foil polymer on a multi-hinged fiberglass skeleton. The foil, similar to that used by NASA, trapped the heat inside the structure while preventing the camouflage outside surface from overheating. This ensured that any animal sensitive to heat would be unaware of its presence. The hinges meant that the blind would move almost like a liquid, filling whatever depression it was dropped into. Instant shelter and vantage point. You simply placed the velcroed bag in a hole and pulled the string. But all the cleverness in the world couldn't improve the atmosphere. Something was troubling Artemis. It was plain in the web of premature lines that spread from the corners of his deep blue eyes. After several nights of fruitless surveillance, Butler plucked up enough courage to ask. "Artemis," he began hesitantly, "I realize it's not my place, but I know there's something wrong, and if there's anything I can do to help." Artemis didn't speak for several moments, and for those few moments Butler saw the face of a young boy, the boy Artemis might have been. "It's my mother, Butler," he said at last. "I'm beginning to wonder if she'll ever—" Then the proximity alarm flashed red. Holly hooked the wings over a low branch, unstrapping the helmet to give her ears some air. You had to be careful with elfin ears. A few hours in the helmet and they started to flake. She gave the tips a massage. No dry skin there. That was because she had a daily moisturizing regime, not like some of the male LEP officers. When they took off their helmets, you'd swear it had just started to snow. Holly paused for a minute to admire the view. Ireland certainly was picturesque. Even the mud people hadn't been able to destroy that. Not yet, anyway. Give them another century or two. The river was folding gently before her like a silver snake, hissing at the water tumbled across a stony bed. The oak tree crackled overhead, its branches rasping together in the bracing breeze. Now to work. She could do the tourist thing all night once her business was complete. A seed. She needed a seed. Holly bent to the ground, brushing the dry leaves and twigs from the clay's surface. Her fingers closed around a smooth acorn. That wasn't hard now, was it? She thought. All that remained for her to do was plant it somewhere else, and her powers would come rushing back. Butler checked the porter radar, muting the volume in case the equipment betrayed their position. The red arms swept the screen with agonizing lethargy, and then, flash! An upright figure by the tree. Too small for an adult, the wrong proportions for a child. He gave Artemis the thumbs-up, possible match. Artemis nodded, strapped the mirrored sunglasses across his brow. Butler followed his lead, popping the cap on his weapon's starlight scope. This was no ordinary dart rifle. It had been specially tooled for a Kenyan ivory hunter and had the range and rapid-fire capacity of a Kalashnikov. Butler had picked it up for a song from a government official after the ivory poacher's execution. They crept into the night and practiced silence. The diminutive figure before them unhooked a contraption from around its shoulders and lifted a full-face helmet from a defiantly non-human head. Butler wrapped the rifle strap twice around his wrist, pulling the stock into his shoulder. He activated the scope, and a red dot appeared in the center of the figure's back. Artemis nodded, and his manservant squeezed the trigger. In spite of 1,000,000 to 1 odds, it was at that precise moment that the figure bent low to the earth. Something whizzed over Holly's head, something that glinted in the starlight. Holly had enough on-the-job experience to realize that she was under fire, and immediately curled her elfin frame into a ball, minimizing the target. She drew her pistol, rolling toward the shelter of the tree trunk. Her brain scrambled for possibilities. Who could be shooting at her, and why? Something was waiting beside the tree, something roughly the size of a mountain, but considerably more mobile. "Nice pea shooter," grinned the figure, smothering Holly's gun hand in a turnip-sized fist. Holly managed to extricate her fingers a nanosecond before they snapped like brittle spaghetti. "I don't suppose you would consider peaceful surrender," said a cold voice behind her. Holly turned, elbows raised for combat. "No," sighed the boy melodramatically. "I suppose not." Holly put on her best brave face. "Stay back, human. You don't know what you're dealing with." The boy laughed. "I believe, fairy, that you are the one unfamiliar with the facts." Fairy? He knew she was a fairy? "I have magic, mudworm, enough to turn you and your gorilla into pig droppings." The boy took a slow step closer. "Brave words, miss, but lies nonetheless. If, as you say, you had magic, you would have no doubt used it by now. No, I suspect that you have gone too long without the ritual, and you are here to replenish your powers." Holly was dumbfounded. There was a human before her, casually spouting sacred secrets. This was disastrous, catastrophic. It could mean the end of generations of peace. If the humans were aware of a fairy subculture, it was only a matter of time before the two species went to war. She must do something, and there was only one weapon left in her arsenal. The mesmer is the lowest form of magic and requires only a trickle of power. There are even certain humans with a bent for the talent. It is within the ability of even the most drained fairy to put a complete mind kibosh on any human alive. Holly summoned the final dribble of magic from the base of her skull. "Human," she intoned, her voice suddenly resonating with bass tones. "Your will is mine." Artis smiled, safe behind his mirrored lenses. "I doubt it," he said, and nodded curtly. Holly felt the dart puncture the suit's toughened material, depositing its load of curare and cyclocholine chloride-based tranquilizer into her shoulder. The world instantly dissolved into a series of technicolored bubbles, and try as she might, Holly couldn't seem to hold on to more than one thought. And that thought was, how did they know? It spiraled around her head as she sank into unconsciousness. How did they know? How did they know? How did they? Artemis saw the pain in the creature's eyes as the hollow hypodermic plunged into her body, and for a moment he experienced misgivings. A female. He hadn't expected that. A female like Juliet or Mother. Then the moment passed and he was himself again. "Good shooting," he said, bending to study their prisoner. "Definitely a girl. Pretty, too, in a pointy sort of way." "Sir?" Butler was pointing to the creature's helmet. It was half buried in a drift of leaves where the fairy had dropped it. A buzzing noise was coming from the crown. Artemis picked up the contraption by the straps, searching for the source. "Ah, here we are." He plucked the view cam from its slot, careful to point the lens away from Butler. "Fairy technology, most impressive," he muttered, popping the battery from its groove. The camera whined and died. "Nuclear power source, if I'm not mistaken. We must be careful not to underestimate our occupants." Butler nodded, sliding their captive into an oversized duffel bag, something else to be lugged around 2 fields, a bog, and a stile.